We're a mobile transformation company. That means we do strategies, we do products, we do media amplification, and we do that across a number of different content plays. So we've worked in various different capacities with The Economist, with the New York Times, with Wall Street Journal, with Condé Nast in our history. So a lot of experience in this. And what I want to talk about today is it's really just three things, hopefully. Really great, it's working. So I want to talk about what's changed. What have the last 6, 7 years of mobile done, and how has that changed consumer behavior? And then I'm going to talk sort of generically, industry-wide, as to how the industry has reacted to that, and talk about 5 strategies, clear strategies that we see coming out of the content industry. And then at the end, talk about 5 ways in which I think we can win, we being the industry can win in this. Of course, this is all personal opinion, but I hope to sort of back it up with some facts and some thinking about this that gives some insight to this. Now, the first thing to talk about what's changed is that ultimately, probably all of you are approaching that mobile tipping point whereby traffic is fundamentally now on a mobile device rather than on a desktop. And we talk about these platforms as being devices, and we talk about the small screen and everything, and it's not about that at all. Actually, the most important thing that's changed is consumer behavior, and it's changed us. It's intertwined into our life, right? And it's become a major foundation of what we do in our lives, this mobile device, this thing that we carry in our pockets the whole time. It's changed us so much that physically we are changing. Now the most popular way of being able to move is like that, using through news feeds. That's a physical gesture which we never had before. If you're young, it might be swiping left and right. But these are gestures that we've never, ever had before. And it's not just the gestures which change. It's the very fact that mobile's always been talked about. And when we talk about mobile, it's about being out and about. Well, no, that's not really it. Mobile's opened up a whole new set of interaction points that we never had before. So, as you can see, sitting in front of the television at 9 o'clock at night is the most popular time to be utilizing mobile. Using mobile in store, in retail environments, using mobile in your car. All of these are new interaction and engagement points that we never had before. So ultimately, we've got to think about mobile as being a behavioral change for consumers, not about being a platform sitting there as an individual device. Yeah? So within that, I also think that's really important because that sets us up to talk about things like what happens with wearables and other devices moving forward. So that's the first thing that's changed. It's a behavior. The second thing is that it is demanding of context, right? Because this is with us the whole time, context is absolutely crucial. And what I mean by context is not just, as we talk about mobile, like location. Right? Location's very important. Where we are is important. But that's not the killer application of mobile. Often it's what we are doing on this device and who we are and what we like on that device, which is the contextual environment we have to work within. So I'll give you a good example. The type of signals that consumers give out that we can start to understand and start to pick up on. I was working with a sports brand, and I was talking about the very fact that understanding people who do sport is so much easier now with mobile. So we can understand the very fact that if you're in the vicinity of a gym, that you could well be working out if your mobile is fixed from a locational perspective. We can understand that if you're on Spotify and you're playing a fitness workout playlist, that the chances are you're going to be working out. We understand that if you're using a fitness application, that you will be doing something like running. So all of these new contextual opportunities arise, and mobile gives us the opportunity to be able to harness them. The third thing is that mobile is all about blending the digital world and the physical world. And this is very, very important because we see mobile as becoming the remote control for people's lives. And it's not just a case of what happens on the screen. So we're moving from what happens here in this interaction to the phone interpreting the world around us. And we can see that with technologies such as augmented reality and the ability to be able to blend there a digital world with the physical world. We can start to see it with the rise of the Internet of Things, the connected sensors, in terms of the connected car or the connected home or the connected city itself, how the mobile will interact with that. So this is not just about looking down at the screen, it's also about holding this device up and interpreting the world in a different way. So that's a behavioral change as well. The next thing that's changed, and I think this is probably not just a mobile thing, but it's probably brought on by social media to a certain extent, but as all social media is now mobile first, I'm going to claim it as being mobile. And the point is that your competition is now your customer. Now, what that means is that there is a finite amount of time that people have to consume content. And of course, all the content that is created by friends and family and colleagues takes up a percentage of that time. So to a certain extent, you've got the content which you'd normally be producing versus the content that is created by friends and family and everything. And that cuts down the amount of time you'd normally have for the content you're producing. But more importantly is that the costs of entry and production have fallen to such a low level, particularly with this device, particularly across platforms such as Instagram and Pinterest and YouTube, that people are now being able to access and create content with large amounts of followings without having to have any of the traditional infrastructure that the content industry has had to build up. And if you think about it, the content industry is basically 5 things. It's about the creation of content, the hosting of that content, the curation of that content, the monetization of that content, and then the distribution of that content. And what we're talking about here is people, which we call influencers, but with massive amounts of followings on YouTube or Pinterest or any of these social networks, whereby they are doing all of those 5 things and it's being facilitated to them. The cost of entry is 0 for them. It's their time. And that means that the people that you were talking to are now having dialogues amongst themselves. And that's all being facilitated by this device. And the final thing that I want to talk about in terms of what's changed is I think that, that there's a clear view that the user interface has become a key competitive differentiator. And what do I mean by that? I mean that the best experience you have on, say, a mobile device anywhere becomes your de facto expectation everywhere. So the very first time that you use Uber and the simplicity of Uber, of getting this car and walking out the cab and not having to pay for it, and everything being located around this, and I can see where the cars are, that experience is quite magical for customers. Customers expect that absolutely now everywhere. So the problem is that it's not about what your competitors are doing, it's about what the whole sector is doing in terms of the quality of the user interface. And that's really important because, particularly on mobile, the level of frustration that people have when things don't work is magnified by 100 times. So whereas on a desktop, people might, spend 3 or 4 times trying to do something. If they can't do it, then give up. On a mobile, it's literally 3 or 4 seconds, and if I can't do it, I give up and I toss aside. So the user interface is incredibly important. That's really important because we're starting to move towards something which I call zero user interface. And I don't know if any of you have seen, this is Joaquin Phoenix in Spike Jonze' film called Her. I don't know if any of you have seen the film Her. If not, yeah, brilliant. Yes, a couple of you have seen it, great. If not, go home and watch it because it's a fantastic film. It's about Joaquin Phoenix's character falls in love with his artificial intelligent personal assistant. Now, that artificial intelligent personal assistant is Scarlett Johansson, so you can sort of understand that. But in doing so, the whole of interface in that film has changed because what he does is he talks, right? He doesn't type. He doesn't use a mouse. He doesn't use touch. He talks. And voice is becoming the absolute zero UI out there at the moment, the user interface. So here's a stat for you. 55% of millennials, right, use Google search via voice every day. My son does not type into Google search. He speaks to Google search. What does that mean when we have a legacy, a history, 20 years of hierarchical navigations and faceted navigations and everything? That's all blown apart because we're moving towards zero UI. And if you haven't seen, I mean, to a certain extent, you can see stuff like, it's starting to come out through the personal assistants like Siri and Cortana and X.AI and all of these type of personal assistants. But you haven't seen Viv yet, V-I-V, Viv. It's by the creators of Siri, and it is possibly the most intelligent personal assistant I've seen. And its UI is completely about voice and a chat type interface in return. That's the way we're moving towards things. And that's going to come up very, very rapidly on the principle that all phones have got a personal assistant built into them now, be that a Google Now or a Siri. They're just going to get better and better. And how do you begin to start to distribute and think about content in that perspective? So those are, I think, the behavioral changes. I now talk about how we as an industry have reacted to that. Are we happy face? Are we smiley face? Are we, kissing face with closed eyes emoji? Never had to use that. 5 different strategies, I think, which have come out of how we've reacted to this mobile opportunity. The first is what I call the Porter strategy, right? And the Porter strategy is basically take what I've done in a different medium and port it directly into mobile. Now, this as a strategy is about having universal access to the same content no matter where, no matter what platform, and not changing that content to affect the format or the type of content that is produced, right? This is very, very much a strategy which is sort of mirrored in the web world by responsive web. You get the same content, the same sort of functionality, no matter where you are across a device, be that a tablet or a mobile or a desktop. I'm not going to say too much about whether I think that's good or bad, because it's not for me to judge whether things are good or bad, but it does feel to me that it's an interim step within this device when you start to look at the other ways of creating different strategies. The second strategy is the strategy of aggregation. And now aggregators have always existed, right? We existed on the web. We had things like Reddit. We have things like the much departed Google Reader. And mobiles has brought that more to the forefront. So we get a lot of different aggregators now coming out. We have Flipboard, we have News, we have Upday, lots of different aggregators. For some reason, they all seem to be shades of red. Maybe red is the aggregation color, I'm not sure. But they're becoming very, very successful. You've got things like Flipboard, 400 million downloads, 100 million monthly active users utilizing it. That's a 70% mobile operation running through there. 10 million plus magazines, which it has on there. It seems to find a real niche because what it does is it takes all that volume and huge fragmentation of content and it provides users with the ability to be able to navigate the things that they're really, really interested in. So it's more of a service than anything else. It's a curation and distribution service. I think that's coming to the forefront. I talked a lot about zero UI as we start to move towards more messaging and chat bots and other types of conversational user interfaces, which is a term you'll hear bandied around. This is, for example, on Slack, which is the internal productivity network and messaging network within businesses. CNN have a service which allows you to be able to follow and unfollow news. This is an aggregator service, no matter what you look at. The third strategy which we see people taking up is the strategy of summarization. Yeah? And summarization is something that is basically about taking content and respecting the user in a different way, not expecting them to have to read through pages and pages of content, because what the summarizers think is that snacking on your mobile device, having very short, very, very quick interactions with content is what the device demands. Now, you can find all sorts of stats to be able to pick that up. Do people watch 7-second videos, 11-second videos, or do they in fact watch half-an-hour videos? The average time spent on YouTube on mobile is 40 minutes. So, summarization plays a different role than actually about just creating time for the customer. But what it is about getting news and content to people really very, very quickly. And we can see a lot of the players in this space. We helped Nick DeLazio build Sumly, which went to Yahoo and became the basis for Yahoo News. MIT have NYT Now, Economist with Espresso. We built Wall Street Journals, What's News. This is about creating a different experience for customers outside of the main experience that they have with the deeper content, either on a desktop or on a mobile device. And again, you know, these things have been incredibly successful. I'm sure, you know, you've had The Economist talk to you, or I think already, or maybe there's also today, I think, they're speaking today. And, you know, fantastic, you know, they're going to give you much more insight than I have. But from what you can get out of press releases, you know, they've had 1 million downloads of Espresso, and they've got 200,000 weekly average users. That's earning $50 a year, basically, if everyone keeps a subscription up. You know, that's a double-digit million business straight there that wasn't there beforehand. Never mind about any form of the advertising and sponsorship which they do on top. That's a real success within mobile. Mostly because the content is very exclusive, but it's completely different content to that which appears in the magazine. Quartz, and I'm sure you've heard from Quartz yesterday, I believe, you know, I'll constantly reference this. Quartz, again, their application in a conversational UI interface, even though it's not an intelligent, artificial intelligence sort of bot, is a summarization tool. It's again about respect of time, delivering content in a different way, you know, the use of emojis, pictures, videos, those type of pieces of content to bring the stories to life in a way. I don't know, again, going back to a film called Starship Troopers, where it's the do you want to know more button which you keep on pressing. Distributors, a lot of talk, that's what the poll's about basically. You know, here's a clue, 80% of BuzzFeed's traffic sits outside of BuzzFeed's own properties. It sits within distribution networks. BuzzFeed does about 180 million monthly active users, probably about on target for $250 million of revenue, okay, yeah? Again, it's a massively successful strategy. But as you start to look towards things like, you know, Facebook Instant Articles, and as you start to look towards Snapchat Discover and these type of distribution platforms, you start to question again this whole, you know, create, host, curate, monetize, distribute. Because of those 5 things, Facebook and Snapchat are hosting, curating, monetizing, sometimes probably more on Facebook than maybe on Snapchat, and distributing. And so what does a content producer do apart from create and maybe monetizing themselves? And if they do monetize on things like Snapchat, they have to pay a big down payment minimum guarantee, of course, to Snapchat itself for the advertising. So it's not an easy strategy to go forward. And then we've got innovators as the final strategy. I think innovation is one of the most interesting things because it, you know, it gives us little small signals of what could happen in the future as being reality. I think, you know, as I keep on referencing, Quartz's app, I think, is incredibly innovative because it talks about conversational UI. That's really important, but you know, that's happening everywhere. So content being on messaging platforms happens everywhere. You know, online, I've picked, for example, Line, which has, you know, what is it, about 500 million downloads, probably about 250 million monthly active users. Wall Street Journal's got 2.1 million users online. Economist has, you know, 180,000 after a few months. These are big audiences. Wall Street Journal said this is the fastest growing platform that they have. This is an interesting one, Pinterest. This is Cosmopolitan. This particular post on Pinterest garnered 227,000 views over a much longer period than it would be in content. And I think it's really interesting using Pinterest to be able to communicate with people, but not just content consumption, but because it has an e-commerce aspect to it as well, has a commerce aspect to it as well. It is vitally important to think about different revenue streams coming off the back of that. Virtual reality is really interesting ways of telling stories. The Guardian's 6x9, which talks about solitary confinement, is an incredibly immersive, engaging, heart-wrenching view of a particular area that could not be brought to life in the same way unless you were immersed in that experience. And you'll talk today about New York Times and virtual reality, but you know, it's a big play by those guys to give out 1 million cardboard headsets, another 300,000 going out, looking at episodic content within VR. You know, this is a big play by them to be able to say this is another way of telling stories that hasn't existed beforehand. So where do all these fit together? I like to draw one graph. I like to draw a power curve with everything that I do. I'm a very simple strategist. On one side, you've got an axis which is about engagement and revenue, and the other one is about reach. And it basically looks like this. What it basically says is that, have I got a laser pointer? No, I haven't got a laser pointer. But What it basically says is that engagement and revenue is that a few people are really, really engaged or produce the most amount of revenue, and there's lots and lots of people who you might reach who don't produce that much engagement, they're infrequent or that much amount of revenue. It's the 80-20 rule in play, right? Where do things sit on this? Distribution is a strategy which is all about reach, but because you're looking at a single article play, it's not about massive engagement, not about massive revenue. Aggregators and summarizers, they sit somewhere in the middle of this, where it's good engagement, good reach, but they're not trying to do the same thing of reaching the millions upon millions and the hundreds of millions of people that the distributors are. The innovators are really starting to work out what that core audience wants that is the most engaged. And as I said beforehand, the porters, I don't really know what the porter strategy is in this because it's neither fish nor fowl when it comes down to it. It's neither about reach, it's neither about engagement, it's about just having universal access to it. So those 5 strategies sort of sit in that area as far as I'm concerned. Another thing as well is you can use this curve for everything. I mean, literally, I do. One thing that we've learned from every single piece of work that we've done is that apps are about engaging a loyal, highly frequent audience, and web is all about reaching a much, much larger, infrequent audience. In doing so, it's not an either or, it's an and strategy for app and web. So a couple of minutes just on how I think we can win. Okay, 5 things that I think are really important. The first point about this is please understand what problem you are now solving for people. If the conversations are happening outside of the normal dialogue that you once had with your your audience, you're in a position whereby you now have to understand what that audience wants. That audience might not want content. They might want a service. They might want the ability to be able to engage in different ways with you. Don't suppose, understand and ask, then build business plans around that. Otherwise, building a business plan saying we did this on desktop or we did this on mobile and now we're going to do this is like taking a square peg and bashing it into a round hole. It does not fit. It will break. So understanding your audience is more important than ever now. On our graph, I think that you have to think about, with whatever property you're going to do, whether you want to be what I call a stretch or a thing. In this case, with the Fantastic Four, stretch is all about getting a maximum amount of reach, but a minimal amount of revenue per user. Thing is all about having a few very, very engaged customers and getting a lot of revenue out of those guys. You cannot do both. You have to think. It doesn't mean that you can't have 2 products doing both, but it can't mean that the same product does everything. So you cannot have something saying, I want to get a massively engaged audience and I want to reach 100 million people with it, because it's just not going to work on that basis. You have to think of either. And I think that's really important. Exclusivity of content creates things. Yeah? The more exclusive your content, the more likely you are to be able to monetize it in a different way because you're talking to fewer people. And services, in particular, are creating stretch. So those are 2 different ways of being able to look at either of those angles. Obviously, you can go anywhere in between, and I'd love to put, Johnny Flame on there as well, but I can't. Right, the third thing is about platforms, not sites or apps. Gone are the days where you can think about building a site or building an app. What you do is you build a platform of content, meta-tagged up to the hilt, which has different presentation layers depending on where that content is going towards. This is a fundamental technological restructure that you need to do as content owners. It's no longer the ability to be able to go and create a product and put it out there. You have to think about how that product might change in the rapid velocity of adoption by customers. We weren't thinking about conversational UI 6 months ago. Now it's the #1 talking point. How does my content and how does my services fit into that now? And how do I take what I've got from a technological platform viewpoint and be able to port that? The clever guys can turn around it like that. Other people have much, much difficulty with legacy systems. So this is about a technological aspect of things. 4th thing is that it's my fundamental belief that if you have an innovation lab, you should scrap it immediately. Innovation needs to run throughout the whole organization. And innovation does not sit in an ivory tower or a silo. It's fine to kickstart the process, but it's not a long-term solution. Because if all of your staff and all of your organization are not thinking innovatively about how to solve these problems and thinking about these different business models, you're not going to get the effect on your bottom line of your business. And finally, for those of you who don't know, this is Michael Caine in a very, very famous film, Get Carter, 1960s film. And it has one of my favorite sayings in this, which I often wheel out to CEOs, which is, you're a big man, but you're out of shape. To me, it's a full-time job, so behave yourself. What that means is that organizationally, most businesses are not fit for purpose for their consumers today. It is not about technology. Technology is the easy thing to solve. It is about the processes that impact that technology, the work processes, the workflows, how that content or how that product reaches a consumer. And those process changes have fundamental cultural changes in an organization. And if the culture does not change, right, to embrace those processes, you hit a buffer, right? So you have to think radically about organizational structural change. That does need to come from the top. It needs a very clear vision. And I think you can look towards the New York Times as being a great example, because they've played that out a lot in the public about the organizational change they've had to take, the process change they've had to take, and the cultural direction of where that business moves towards. So those are the 5 things that I think that are important for how we win. Thank you very much indeed.